Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving into something today that we all kind of feel, but we rarely stop to actually map out. We're talking about the butterfly effect of global news. We're going to look at how seemingly isolated events happening thousands of miles apart are actually deeply, deeply interconnected, and how they have a very direct, tangible impact on our daily lives. From the price of groceries at your local store to the technology driving your next car, today's international headlines are literally writing the script for tomorrow's reality. So let's get into it. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to kick things off with global geopolitics and conflict, shift over to international diplomatic ties, look at North American trade disputes, check in on the technology and auto industry, and finally, touch on natural disasters and tragedies.
Section 1. Global Geopolitics and Conflict. Tensions and Economic Pressure.
Right now, we're watching two major moves happen at the exact same time. First, the U.S. is gearing up for some severe financial penalties against Iran. The goal here is to really limit their ability to move money through the international financial system. But on the flip side, Tehran is pushing back, issuing stark warnings that this kind of pressure is going to have direct consequences for regional security. Both sides are making some very heavy strategic moves, but it's where this tension actually plays out that matters most to the rest of the world. Which brings us to a massive global choke point, the Strait of Hormuz. If you're not familiar with it, it's this incredibly narrow waterway connecting the Persian Gulf with the Gulf of Oman. And honestly, it is an absolute bottleneck for global energy because huge quantities of the world's oil have to pass through it every single day. To complicate things even further, Iran has announced transit service fees for authorized vessels moving through the strait, which adds a whole new layer of uncertainty for international shipping. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why a regional dispute like that matters to you and me. Let's play this out and see the actual so what here. Step 1. We get a serious disruption in the strait due to these tensions. That instantly triggers Step 2, higher oil prices globally because the supply is threatened. Step 3. Those higher fuel prices mean increased shipping costs for literally everything that moves across the globe, which finally brings us to Step 4, global economic pressure. This is exactly how a policy decision in Washington and a response in Tehran can literally jack up the cost of filling your gas tank or buying your groceries.
Section 2. Shifting international diplomatic ties, mediation and strategic alliances.
So right now, Syria and Israel are in the middle of border discussions being mediated by the U.S., all to prevent further regional instability. And this highlights a wildly delicate balancing act for the United States. Think about it. On one hand, as we just talked about, they're applying severe financial pressure on Iran. But on the other hand, they are actively acting as a mediator here, trying to prevent instability from spreading wider across the Middle East. It's a very complex diplomatic tightrope, and whether these talks can actually cool tensions is a huge key to regional stability. Meanwhile, looking at another vital diplomatic effort, India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar is currently in Moscow for the India-Russia Intergovernmental Commission talks. The main focus areas? Trade, investment, energy, and economic cooperation. The really crucial takeaway here is understanding India's broader strategy. They are actively working to maintain strong economic and strategic relationships with major global powers, like Russia. It's a perfect example of nations securing their own economic interests through strategic alliances, totally independent of other global tensions. Section 3. North American Trade Disputes, U.S.-Canada Negotiations. Trade negotiations between Washington and Ottawa have essentially stalled out, and that is putting a staggering amount of cross-border trade at risk of reciprocal tariffs. We're talking about automobiles, agricultural products, energy, machinery, the whole nine yards. The U.S. and Canada have one of the most interconnected trading relationships on the planet. Millions of dollars worth of these exact goods cross that shared border every single day. If you throw tariffs into that mix and disrupt the flow, the impact is going to be massive and it's going to be immediate. Which leads perfectly into the downstream effect. Reciprocal tariffs might sound like abstract economic jargon, but they translate directly into higher costs for businesses. And let's be real, businesses almost never just absorb those costs. Ultimately, they get passed right along, leading to increased prices for everyday consumers. So again, a breakdown in a negotiation room in Washington or Ottawa eventually makes its way right to your wallet. It is all deeply connected. Section 4. Technology and auto industry, recalls and robotics. Millions. Just let that scale sink in for a second. That is the staggering number of vehicles currently being recalled in China by major automakers, including Tesla. The main concerns here revolve around door handles and emergency access systems. Now, China is a massive hub for electric vehicle production, and it's one of the biggest auto markets in the world. While recalls are pretty standard for fixing safety issues, doing it on the scale of millions of vehicles creates some astronomical cost for manufacturers. As automakers compete fiercely, the reliability and safety of this new tech is really being put to the test. But while car tech is hitting a few speed bumps, robotics is literally sprinting ahead. Engineering reports are now highlighting a new Chinese robot that has reportedly run a 100-meter sprint faster than previous human benchmarks. Think about that for a second. We're juxtaposing the physical flaws in our everyday cars with this mind-blowing leap forward in robotics. Modern machines aren't just bolted to factory floors anymore. They're being designed to run, jump, and navigate incredibly complex environments.
Which really forces us to ask a pretty massive question. How on earth do we control and regulate these increasingly powerful, autonomous machines? As these robots transition out of the lab and into real-world applications, whether that's logistics or even disaster response, our regulatory frameworks are going to have to catch up to the engineering, and they're going to have to do it fast.
Section 5. Natural disasters and tragedies. The human toll.
At the end of the day, behind all the tech and the economics, global news is about the human experience. And sometimes that means facing tragic human tolls. We need to pause on this stark number, 30. That is the reported number of lives lost after a massive garbage site collapsed and buried nearby homes in Guinea's capital. It is just an enormous, heartbreaking human tragedy for those families and for that entire community. Beyond the immediate, devastating grief, a disaster exactly like this forces some incredibly tough societal questions. It highlights the deadly dangers of unstable waste sites sitting right next to vulnerable communities. It really forces us to look at the immense pressure being put on urban infrastructure, waste management, and basic public safety in rapidly expanding cities all across the globe. Shifting to a very different kind of natural event, we have a 5.9. That was the magnitude of a significant earthquake that recently struck Japan's Ibaraki prefecture. Now, scientifically, a 5.9 is considered a moderate seismic event, but it still resulted in reports of dozens of injuries and some severe transportation disruptions. It is a sobering reminder of the raw, unpredictable power of nature. But the huge takeaway here is the contrast. Japan combats that raw unpredictability with just world-leading preparedness. Strict building standards and incredibly extensive emergency response systems are just baked right into their society. And those systems are exactly what prevent a 5.9 magnitude event from spiraling into a much larger catastrophe. It shows how deliberate policy and preparation can genuinely mitigate the worst impacts of nature. And that brings us right back to the core theme of this explainer, the butterfly effect. Just look at the web we've mapped out today. Geopolitical maneuvers in Washington and Tehran directly impact your global energy prices. A trade dispute at the US-Canada border can raise your day-to-day consumer costs. A technological breakthrough in China can reshape global industries. And natural disasters, whether they happen in Guinea or Japan, can change thousands of lives in an absolute instant. These seemingly isolated events are, in reality, a deeply, deeply woven web.
So, I want to leave you with this one question to chew on. How will today's global headlines impact your life tomorrow? The events we talked about today are still unfolding, and their ripples are going to keep spreading. Staying informed, understanding the structure behind the news, and seeing those connections is honestly more important now than ever. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions and keep watching how our world connects.